She poured his $1,000 wine with hands that were sore from scrubbing floors just hours earlier. He was a titan of industry, a man whose name was whispered with fear and reverence in boardrooms across the globe. To him, she was just another nameless servant, an inconvenience in a starched apron. He criticized the service, oblivious that the woman he was belittling carried his own blood in her veins, her exhausted eyes a mirror of the woman he had abandoned decades ago. This isn't just a story of a waitress and a billionaire. It's the story of a secret buried for 24 years, and the explosive moment a daughter unknowingly served her own father, the architect of her difficult life, and the ghost she never knew she was searching for. The air in the Gilded Spoon was different. It was heavier, scented with money and the subtle, expensive perfumes of its patrons. It smelled of truffle oil, aged leather, and a particular kind of entitlement that clung to the velvet drapes and settled in the plush carpets. For Olivia Sterling, 24 years old and running on 6 hours of sleep and 3 cups of coffee, it was the smell of survival. Her feet throbbed in her sensible, non-slip black shoes, a dull ache that had become as constant as the rhythm of her own breathing. Each step was a tiny protest from muscles strained by 16-hour days, 8 hours at a greasy spoon diner in the mornings where the tips were meager, but the coffee was free, followed by 8 hours here, in this cathedral of haute cuisine, where a single dropped fork sounded like a blasphemy. The crisp, white apron tied tightly around her waist felt more like a suit of armor than a uniform, protecting her from the casual cruelties and dismissive glances of a world she served but could never belong to. Tonight, the ache was deeper. It wasn't just physical. It was a soul-deep weariness that came from staring at the mountain of her late mother's medical bills, a stack of paper that represented the last, desperate year of a life lived with quiet grace and unending struggle. Sarah Sterling had been Olivia's entire world, a warm, steady presence who had worked her fingers to the bone to give her daughter a chance. She had been a seamstress, her love stitched into every hem and collar she repaired, her dreams for Olivia woven into the fabric of their small, rented apartment. But cancer didn't care about dreams. It had consumed Sarah slowly. Then all at once, leaving Olivia with a hollow chest, cherished memories, and a debt that felt like a physical weight on her shoulders. Nursing school was the goal. It had been her mother's dream for her, a way to turn her innate empathy into a career, to offer the same gentle care to others that she had given her mother in those final, painful months. The acceptance letter was pinned to the corkboard in her tiny kitchen, a beacon of hope in a sea of despair. But the tuition fees were another mountain, one she couldn't see the top of. So she worked. She poured coffee, she cleared plates, she polished silverware until she could see her own tired reflection, and she smiled. She smiled her professional, unobtrusive waitress smile until her cheeks ached, a mask of pleasant efficiency that hid the frantic calculations whirring in her mind. Olivia, Table 7 needs their check, and the party at 12 is asking for you, hissed Mr. Beaumont, the maitre d', his voice a venomous whisper that could curdle cream. He was a small, precise man who moved through the restaurant like a shark, sensing weakness and ready to strike. And for heaven's sake, straighten your apron. You look ruffled. Olivia smoothed the front of her apron, forcing another smile. Right away, Mr. Beaumont. Table 7 was a couple celebrating an anniversary, their soft focus happiness a world away from her own sharp-edged reality. Table 12 was a group of investment bankers, loud and boisterous, their conversation a jumble of stock options and weekend plans in the Hamptons. She navigated between them, a ghost in a white apron, refilling water glasses, answering questions about the pan-seared scallops, and pretending not to hear the condescending snap of fingers meant to summon her. It was just after 9 o'clock when he walked in. The subtle shift in the restaurant's atmosphere was immediate, a ripple of deference and anxiety. The ambient chatter seemed to dip by a few decibels. Mr. Beaumont, who typically held himself with the rigid posture of a king, practically bowed. Olivia, standing by the service station, watched the entrance. He was tall, with a mane of silver-grey hair swept back from a sharp, imposing face. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that probably cost more than her nursing school tuition for a semester. There was an aura of cold, absolute power around him, an unnerving stillness that made everyone else in his orbit seem frantic and insignificant. He wasn't just wealthy. He was wealth personified, a monument to merciless success. She recognized him instantly from the covers of business magazines she'd seen at newsstands. Conrad Blackwood, the CEO of Blackwood Industries, a global conglomerate with its fingers in everything from tech to real estate. A man known as the Vulture of Wall Street, famous for his ruthless takeovers and his legendary impatience. He was flanked by a younger man and an elegant woman with a severe haircut and a tablet clutched in her hand. His lieutenants, ready for battle. "Mr. Blackwood," Beaumont gushed, his voice losing its usual acidic bite and becoming syrupy sweet. "We have your usual table ready, of course. Right this way." Conrad Blackwood didn't acknowledge him. His gaze swept across the dining room, a brief, dismissive inventory of his surroundings. His eyes, the color of cold steel, were unsettling. They didn't seem to see people, only objects, obstacles or assets. For a fleeting second, his gaze passed over Olivia, and she felt a strange, involuntary shiver. It was like being appraised by a predator, a momentary assessment followed by immediate disinterest. He saw a uniform, a fixture of the establishment, and nothing more. "The corner table. And I want a bottle of the 82 Petrus brought to me immediately. Don't let some fumbling sommelier make a show of it. Just open it and bring it," he commanded, his voice low and gravelly, accustomed to immediate obedience. "Of course, Mr. Blackwood. Olivia!" Beaumont snapped, turning to her with renewed urgency. "You're on table 3. See to it. And be perfect. Do you understand me? Perfect." Olivia's heart hammered against her ribs. She had served difficult customers before, arrogant politicians, spoiled celebrities, demanding heiresses. But this felt different. This man radiated an intensity that made the air crackle. She took a deep breath, smoothed her apron one last time, and picked up 3 menus, her professional mask firmly in place. As she approached the table, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the polished surface of a silver ice bucket. A tired girl with her mother's determined jaw and eyes that held too many worries. She pushed the thought away. Tonight, she was not Olivia Sterling, the grieving daughter, the aspiring nurse. She was just a waitress at the Gilded Spoon, and she had a job to do. Approaching Conrad Blackwood's table felt like entering a different climate zone. The air grew colder, charged with an unspoken tension. His 2 associates, a man in his late 30s named Richard, and the sharp-featured woman, Eleanor Vance, were already looking at their phones, their silence perfectly synchronized with their boss's mood. Conrad himself was staring out the large window overlooking the city, his profile stark and unforgiving against the glittering skyline. He didn't look at Olivia as she approached. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady and calm, a carefully practiced tone of professional warmth. "My name is Olivia, and I'll be your server tonight. May I start you off with some water while you look at the menu?" Richard and Eleanor murmured their assent without looking up. Conrad remained silent, his gaze fixed on the world outside, a world he had so thoroughly conquered. Olivia moved with quiet efficiency, pouring chilled water from a crystal carafe into their glasses, her movements precise and economical. She had learned long ago that the key to serving the ultra-rich was to be as unobtrusive as a shadow. When the wine arrived, delivered by the sommelier with the reverence of a holy relic, Conrad finally turned his attention to the table. He waved the sommelier away with an impatient flick of his wrist before the man could even begin his customary speech about the vintage. Conrad inspected the bottle, then the cork, his expression one of deep skepticism, as if expecting to find a flaw. He poured a small amount into his own glass, swirled it, and inhaled its aroma with the focused intensity of a scientist. Finally, he took a sip. For a moment, he held the wine in his mouth, his steely eyes closed. Olivia stood perfectly still, holding her breath. The entire table seemed to be in suspended animation, waiting for his verdict. "Passable," he finally declared, setting the glass down with a decisive click. It was not a compliment. It was a grudging acceptance of a bare minimum standard. He gestured for Olivia to pour for the others. As she carefully filled Eleanor's and Richard's glasses, her hand was steady, betraying none of the nervousness she felt under his scrutinizing gaze. She could feel his eyes on her, not with any personal interest, but with the critical assessment of a man evaluating a piece of machinery. "Are you ready to order, or would you like a few more moments with the menu?" she asked, her tone even. "We know what we want," Conrad stated, not bothering to open the leather-bound menu in front of him. "I'll have the foie gras to start, followed by the Wagyu steak, medium rare. And I mean truly medium rare, a warm, red center. If it comes out even a shade toward medium, I will send it back. The vegetables will be steamed, no butter, no salt. And bring me a side of plain steamed asparagus." It was a litany of commands, delivered without a single "please" or "thank you." Richard and Eleanor echoed his order with minor variations, their choices deferential, as if careful not to outshine their leader. Olivia noted it all down on her pad, her expression neutral. "An excellent choice, sir," she said simply. "I will put that right in for you." As she turned to leave, his voice cut through the air, sharp as a shard of ice. "Waitress." She stopped and turned back. "Yes, sir?" He gestured vaguely at her apron with his fork. This establishment prides itself on its standards. One would expect the staff to reflect that. "Your uniform appears tired." Olivia's cheeks flushed with heat. Her uniform was pristine, starched and laundered that very morning. But it was not new. It was one of two she rotated, and after months of long shifts and harsh industrial cleaning, the white had perhaps faded from brilliant to merely clean. It was an impossibly petty criticism, designed to assert dominance, to remind her of her station. She met his cold gaze directly. "I apologize if my appearance is not to your satisfaction, sir. I can assure you, it is clean." Her voice was quiet but firm, a spark of defiance in her tired eyes. A flicker of something, surprise, annoyance, crossed his face. He was not used to being met with anything other than complete capitulation. Eleanor Vance looked up from her tablet, a glint of interest in her intelligent eyes. Conrad gave a short, mirthless huff. "See that your service is better than your attire." He dismissed her with a wave of his hand, turning his attention back to his wine. The rest of the meal was a tightrope walk. Olivia moved with flawless professionalism, anticipating their needs before they were voiced. She refilled water glasses silently, cleared plates with practiced grace, and ensured each course was delivered to the correct person without a word. Yet, she could feel Conrad Blackwood's critical eye on her every move. He complained that the bread was not warm enough. He sent back his first glass of water because the lemon slice was, in his opinion, cut too thick. Each complaint was a small power play, a needle prick of condescension. Through it all, Olivia maintained her composure. She remembered her mother's words. "Dignity, Livy, is the one thing no one can take from you unless you give it to them." So she smiled her polite, professional smile, said, "Right away, sir, and I'll take care of that for you, sir," and refused to let him see the frustration simmering beneath the surface. She was a ghost, a pair of hands, an instrument of service. That's all he saw, and that's all she would be. The final insult came with the bill. The total was well over $2,000, a sum that represented 2 months of Olivia's rent. Richard placed a corporate credit card in the leather folder. When Olivia returned with the slip to be signed, Conrad took the pen himself. He paused for a long, deliberate moment, his cold eyes locking with hers one last time. Then, with a flourish, he signed his name and drew a sharp, definitive line through the tip section. In the space for the amount, he wrote in a single, insulting penny. He pushed the folder back across the table. "A tip should reflect the quality of the experience," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. And this experience was, as I said, merely passable. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It wasn't about the money. It was a final, calculated gesture of contempt. It was a message. You are worthless. Olivia looked down at the receipt, at the insulting Auto 1 scrawled next to his arrogant signature. For a moment, the mask almost slipped. The exhaustion, the grief, the endless pressure, it all threatened to boil over. She wanted to scream, to throw the folder back in his face, to tell him what she thought of him and his miserable, empty life. But she didn't. She took a slow, deep breath, her mother's face flashing in her mind. She thought of the nursing school acceptance letter. She thought of dignity. She carefully closed the folder, her movements calm and measured. She looked Conrad Blackwood directly in the eye, and for the first time, her professional smile didn't reach her own. Her eyes were clear and steady, holding a depth of weary resilience that he could never comprehend. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice devoid of any inflection. "I hope you have the evening you deserve." With that, she turned and walked away, her back straight, leaving the titan of industry sitting in a pool of stunned silence. Eleanor Vance watched her go, a look of profound, unreadable contemplation on her face. For the first time all evening, Conrad Blackwood looked genuinely unsettled. The girl hadn't broken. She hadn't even flinched. And her parting words, delivered with such chilling poise, echoed in his ears not as an insult, but as a curse. Back in the clamour and steam of the kitchen, Olivia finally allowed her composure to crack. She sagged against a cool, stainless steel counter, the leather bill folder clutched in her hand like a weapon. The single cent felt like it weighed 100 pounds. "Hey, you okay?" Liam, a kind-faced, aspiring actor who worked the bar, came over with a glass of water for her. His friendly brown eyes were filled with concern. He'd seen the whole exchange from his post. "That guy was a piece of work. Blackwood, right? I've heard stories. They call him the Ice King." Olivia took a grateful sip of water, the cool liquid doing little to douse the fire in her chest. "Ice King is too generous. He's a black hole in a $1,000 suit." She opened the folder and showed Liam the receipt. He let out a low whistle. 1 cent? Wow, that's not just cheap. That's artistic. It's a masterpiece of jerkiness. He tried to make a joke of it, to lighten the mood, but he could see the hurt in her eyes. "Don't let him get to you, Liv. He's miserable. People like that. They have to make everyone else feel as small as they do." "I know," she sighed, her shoulders slumping. "It's just, some days are harder than others." Today was one of those days. The insult felt disproportionately large, a symbol of every obstacle in her path. It was the universe reminding her that no matter how hard she worked, she was still just a girl in a tired uniform, serving men who could buy and sell her life without a second thought. She finished her shift on autopilot, her mind a million miles away. By the time she was walking home, under the hazy glow of the city streetlights, the anger had subsided, replaced by a familiar, gnawing ache of loneliness. The confrontation with Blackwood had dredged up feelings she tried to keep buried, a deep-seated resentment for the unfairness of it all. Her apartment was small, but it was hers. It was filled with the lingering presence of her mother. Sarah's worn armchair was still in the corner, a book of poetry resting on the side table. Her sewing machine sat silent on a small desk. Olivia ran a hand over its cool metal body, remembering the constant, comforting hum it used to make, the soundtrack of her childhood. This was what men like Conrad Blackwood could never understand. They saw poverty as a failure of character, not a circumstance. They didn't see the love and resilience that flourished in the cracks of a hard life. Her mother had faced every day with a strength that Blackwood, with all his billions, could never possess. Olivia walked over to her small chest of drawers. From the top drawer she pulled out a small, velvet-lined box. Inside was her most treasured possession, a simple, tarnished silver locket. It had been her mother's. Sarah had worn it every single day, a constant, quiet tribute to a past Olivia knew almost nothing about. "Who was he, Mom?" she whispered to the empty room, her voice thick with emotion as she opened the locket. On one side was a tiny, faded photograph of her mother, young and radiant, her smile impossibly bright. On the other side was a picture of a young man. He couldn't have been much older than Olivia was now. He was handsome, with intense, dark eyes, and a shock of unruly hair that fell over his forehead. He wasn't smiling, but there was a fiery ambition in his gaze, a hunger for the world. This was her father, the man who had vanished before she was born. Her mother had rarely spoken of him. When Olivia asked, Sarah's expression would become distant, a veil of old pain clouding her features. "He was brilliant, Livy," she would say, her voice soft. "And he had dreams bigger than this little town. He had to go make his mark on the world." She never sounded bitter, only sad. She had told Olivia his name was Conrad, and that he was a dreamer with a poet's soul and a lion's ambition. That was all. There was no last name, no explanation for his complete and total absence. Olivia traced the outline of the young man's face with her fingertip. Those eyes. There was something familiar about their intensity, their sharp focus. She shook her head, dismissing the thought. She was just tired, her mind playing tricks on her. There was no way this passionate, hungry young man in the locket could have any connection to the cold, soulless billionaire she had served tonight. They were worlds apart. She closed the locket with a soft click and placed it back in its box, the mystery of her father remaining, as always, locked away. Meanwhile, across town, in a penthouse apartment that overlooked Central Park like a kingdom, Conrad Blackwood couldn't get the waitress out of his mind. It was absurd. He dealt with heads of state, corporate raiders, and market fluctuations that could bankrupt small countries. The opinion of a nameless server should have been less than insignificant. Yet, he couldn't shake the image of her face. It wasn't her defiance. He was used to people challenging him. It was something else. It was the way she had looked at him at the end, her eyes clear and unwavering, holding not just anger, but a profound, weary sorrow. And her final words, "I hope you have the evening you deserve," had lodged in his mind like a splinter of glass. He was pouring himself a glass of scotch when Eleanor Vance let herself in with her own key. She was more than his executive assistant. She was his gatekeeper, his strategist, and, in many ways, the custodian of his carefully constructed life. "The preliminary reports on the Omnicorp acquisition are on your desk," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "I've highlighted the key vulnerabilities." Conrad grunted, taking a long swallow of the fiery liquid. "Good." Eleanor watched him for a moment, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "You were unusually harsh tonight, Conrad. Even for you." "The service was subpar," he stated flatly. "The girl was flawless, and you know it," Eleanor countered, her tone unwavering. She was one of the few people who could speak to him so directly. "You were trying to provoke her." "Why?" Conrad swirled the amber liquid in his glass, staring into its depths. "There was something about her," he said, more to himself than to Eleanor. "Her eyes, a certain resolve. It was familiar." He paused, the memory nagging at him. "Find out who she is." Eleanor raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "You want me to run a background check on a waitress? Because you left her a 1-cent tip?" "Don't question me, Eleanor. Just do it," he commanded, his voice returning to its usual imperious tone. "Her name was Olivia. Find out her last name, where she lives, whatever you can. I want to know who she is." Eleanor simply nodded. "Consider it done." She knew better than to argue when he was in this mood. She had worked for Conrad Blackwood for 15 years, had witnessed his ruthless ascent firsthand. She had seen him destroy companies, ruin competitors, and walk away from the wreckage without a flicker of emotion. But tonight, she had seen something she'd never seen before. A crack in the ice. The waitress, Olivia, had somehow gotten under his skin, and Eleanor Vance had a feeling that when she started digging, she was going to find something far more significant than a disgruntled employee. The vulture of Wall Street was rattled, and she was determined to find out why. Eleanor Vance was exceptionally good at her job. To her, information was a currency, and she was a master of acquiring it. A request from Conrad Blackwood to investigate a waitress was unusual, but the task itself was trivial. Within a few hours, using a combination of discreet inquiries and access to databases that weren't exactly public, she had a complete file on her boss's desk. She walked into his expansive home office, a minimalist space of glass, chrome, and black leather that offered a panoramic view of the city lights. Conrad was standing by the window, a dark silhouette against the glittering tapestry of Manhattan. He hadn't changed out of his suit. "I have the information you requested," Eleanor said, placing a slim folder on his large, empty desk. He turned slowly, his face unreadable in the dim light. "That was fast." "Her name is Olivia Sterling," Eleanor began, her voice neutral. 24 years old. Currently works 2 jobs, a morning shift at the Sunrise Diner on 10th Avenue and evenings at the Gilded Spoon. She's enrolled for the fall semester at NYU's College of Nursing. She lives alone in a small apartment in Hell's Kitchen. Her mother, Sarah Sterling, passed away 6 months ago from ovarian cancer. It appears the girl is saddled with a significant amount of medical debt. Eleanor paused. There's no father listed on her birth certificate. At the mention of the name, Conrad froze. Sterling. The word struck him like a physical blow, a name he hadn't heard spoken aloud in connection to himself in over 2 decades. a name he had shed like a snake's skin when he had clawed his way out of poverty and remade himself as Conrad Blackwood. His carefully constructed composure crumbled. He strode to the desk and snatched the folder, his hands trembling slightly as he opened it. The first page was a printout of Olivia's employee file from the restaurant, complete with a grainy ID photo. He stared at the image, his breath catching in his throat. It was her face, the face of the defiant waitress. But beneath the exhaustion and the premature hardness around her eyes, he saw it. It was undeniable. She had Sarah's jawline, the same determined set to her mouth, and her eyes. They were his. That same intense, steel-colored gaze that stared back at him from the mirror every morning. It was a ghost of the past, a living, breathing echo of a life he had buried. Sarah Sterling, he whispered, the name feeling foreign and yet intimately familiar on his tongue. He sank into his leather chair, the pages of the report rustling in his unsteady hands. Eleanor watched him, her professional mask firmly in place, but her mind was racing. She had never seen him like this. The invincible Conrad Blackwood, undone by a single name. She had always known his past was a carefully guarded secret, that Blackwood was an identity he had adopted. Now, she was witnessing the reason why. Conrad's mind was a maelstrom of memories he had ruthlessly suppressed for 25 years. He wasn't Conrad Blackwood then. He was Conrad Sterling, a dirt-poor kid from a forgotten town in upstate New York, with nothing but a brilliant mind and a burning, all-consuming ambition. And he had loved Sarah. God, he had loved her with a ferocity that scared him. She was his calm, his anchor. She was a seamstress who saw the poetry in his soul that everyone else dismissed as reckless arrogance. They had planned a future, a life away from the crushing poverty of their hometown. But then the opportunity came, a once-in-a-lifetime chance, a deal with a dying, childless tycoon named Alistair Blackwood. The old man saw the same ruthless spark in Conrad that he possessed. He offered him everything, an education, a place in his company, his name, his entire empire. But there was a condition. He had to disappear. He had to sever all ties to his former life, to become a new man, unburdened by the past. Alistair wanted a successor, not a sentimental boy with attachments. Conrad had told himself it was for Sarah, too, that he would build an empire and come back for her, showering her with the world she deserved. But he knew, even then, it was a lie he told himself to justify his choice. Sarah had told him she was pregnant just days before he was set to leave. It should have changed everything. Instead, it had terrified him. A child felt like an anchor when all he wanted to do was fly. He promised he would send for them. He promised he would write. He left with nothing but a note, and he never looked back. The first few years were a blur of relentless work, of moulding himself into the man Alistair Blackwood wanted him to be. The guilt was a physical pain, but he buried it under 100-hour work weeks, under stock charts and acquisition plans. He told himself Sarah would have moved on, found someone better, someone who could give her a stable life. He never sent for her. The name Sterling became a whisper from a forgotten dream. Now that dream was staring at him from a grainy photograph. Olivia Sterling, his daughter, the daughter he had abandoned. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Her age, the city, the name, her resilience, her defiance, that fire in her eyes. It wasn't just his imagination. It was his own blood, his own stubborn pride, staring back at him across a restaurant table. He had looked at his own child and seen nothing but a servant. He had insulted her, belittled her, and left her a 1-cent tip. The sheer, grotesque irony of it was a knife in his gut. The vulture of Wall Street had tried to wound a waitress and had ended up gutting himself. He flipped to the next page of the report, a copy of Sarah Sterling's death certificate. Cause of death, ovarian cancer. Date of death, 6 months ago. She had died here, in this city, alone and drowning in medical debt, while he sat in his penthouse, counting his billions. The pain of that knowledge was sharp and absolute, a kind of agony he hadn't felt in decades. He had failed her. He had let her die alone while he played king of a meaningless empire. He stood up, his movements stiff, and walked to a locked drawer in his desk. He opened it and pulled out a small, worn leather wallet he hadn't touched in years. Inside was a single, creased photograph. It was of him and Sarah, taken in a cheap photo booth a lifetime ago. He was the young man from the locket, full of fire and ambition, and she was looking at him with a love so pure and unconditional it broke his heart all over again. He held the photo of Sarah next to the ID picture of Olivia. The resemblance was uncanny, a heartbreaking fusion of the two of them, his daughter. All these years she had been here, struggling, grieving, fighting for a life he had denied her. Eleanor stood silently by the door, giving him space. She could see the storm of emotions on his face, shock, regret, and a profound, world-altering guilt. The ice had not just cracked, it had shattered. "Leave me," Conrad said, his voice rough, choked with an emotion she couldn't identify. She nodded and slipped out of the room, closing the door softly behind her. Alone, Conrad Blackwood, Conrad Sterling, stared at the face of the daughter he never knew, and for the first time in 25 years, the vulture of Wall Street wept. 2 days later, Olivia was in the middle of a chaotic dinner rush at the Gilded Spoon when Mr. Beaumont approached her, his face a mask of barely concealed panic. "Table 3, he hissed, gesturing with his head. "It's him again. He's asking for you." Olivia's stomach clenched. Conrad Blackwood was back. She looked over and saw him sitting at the same corner table, but this time he was alone. There were no associates, no laptops, no air of business. He was just sitting there, staring at the empty chair opposite him, a solitary, imposing figure in the bustling restaurant. "I don't want to take that table, Mr. Beaumont," she said, her voice low but firm. Beaumont's eyes widened. "Don't be ridiculous. This is Conrad Blackwood. You will go over there. You will be polite, and you will give him whatever he wants. Do you understand?" Left with no choice, Olivia took a deep breath and walked toward the table. The memory of his 1-cent insult was still fresh, a stinging humiliation she had no desire to repeat. She steeled herself for another round of petty cruelty. As she approached, he looked up, and the expression in his eyes stopped her cold. The icy arrogance was gone. In its place was something she couldn't decipher, a strange mix of apprehension, guilt, and an unnerving intensity. "Miss Sterling," he said, his voice softer than she remembered. He had used her last name. "Mr. Blackwood," she replied coolly, her professional mask snapping back into place. "What can I get for you this evening?" "Please, sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Olivia blinked, taken aback. "Sir, I'm working. I can't." "I've already spoken to your manager," he cut in. "He's aware that I require your time. Please." The last word was not a command, but a request. It was so out of character that it threw her completely off balance. Hesitantly, she pulled out the chair and sat, perching on the edge of the velvet seat. She felt the eyes of the entire restaurant staff on them. This was bizarre. "I wanted to apologize," he began, his gaze unwavering. "My behavior the other night was inexcusable. It was rude, arrogant, and cruel. There is no justification for it. Olivia stared at him, speechless. An apology? From Conrad Blackwood? It was unthinkable. She remained silent, her expression wary. He seemed to take her silence as a cue to continue. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a long, white envelope, sliding it across the table toward her. "This is a cashier's check for $50,000. Consider it a retroactive tip, a down payment on my apology. It should help with your expenses." She looked from the envelope to his face. The gesture, which he likely intended as generous, felt deeply insulting. He thought he could erase his behavior with money. He thought he could buy her forgiveness. The anger she had suppressed 2 nights ago came roaring back to life. She pushed the envelope back toward him. "I don't want your money, Mr. Blackwood." He looked genuinely surprised. "I don't think you understand. This could solve many of your problems, your tuition, your debts. The only problem I have right now is this conversation," she said, her voice sharp and clear, all pretense of professional deference gone. "You can't treat someone like dirt and then throw money at them to make it go away. My dignity isn't for sale." She stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "Now, if you're not going to order anything, I have other tables to attend to." "Wait," he said, his voice cracking with an urgency that was startling. He stood up as well, his tall frame looming over her. The surrounding tables fell silent, their occupants watching the unfolding drama. "Please, you don't understand. This isn't just about the other night." He looked at her, his eyes searching her face, and the expression in them was one of raw, painful desperation. It was the look of a man on the edge of a cliff. "Your mother," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Her name was Sarah Sterling. From Auburn. The world stopped. Olivia's blood ran cold. How could he know that? How could this man, this stranger, know the name of her mother and the small town she had so desperately escaped? "How do you know that name?" she breathed, her heart pounding in her chest like a drum. He took a shaky breath, the sound seeming to echo in the suddenly silent dining room. The patrons, the staff, Mr. Beaumont hovering anxiously by the kitchen door, they all faded away. There were only the 2 of them, standing in a bubble of impossible, terrifying reality. "Because I knew her," he said, his voice thick with decades of unspoken regret. "I knew her a long time ago, before all of this." He gestured vaguely at the opulent room, at his expensive suit, at the life he had built. "My name," he hesitated, the next words seeming to cost him everything. "Before I was Conrad Blackwood, my name, my real name, was Conrad Sterling." The name hit her like a physical force, knocking the air from her lungs. Sterling. It wasn't a coincidence. All at once, it all made a terrible, horrifying kind of sense. The locket, the ambitious young man with the intense, dark eyes. His eyes, the same steely, piercing gaze that was now staring at her, filled with a pain that mirrored her own shock. The floor seemed to drop out from under her. She gripped the back of the chair to steady herself, her mind reeling, trying to connect the impossible dots. The absent father her mother had described as a brilliant dreamer, the ruthless billionaire standing before her. They were the same person. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in denial. "It's not possible." "Look at me, Olivia," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Look at my eyes. They're the same as yours, the same as the man in the locket your mother always wore." The locket. He knew about the locket. The truth crashed down on her with the force of a tidal wave, a devastating, life-altering revelation in the middle of a crowded restaurant. This cold, cruel man who had humiliated her was not just a billionaire. He was her father. The revelation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. For a moment, Olivia could only stare at him, her mind a blank canvas of shock. Then the numbness gave way to a surge of white-hot rage, a fury so intense it made her tremble. It was the anger of 24 years of unanswered questions, of a childhood with a gaping hole where a father should have been, of watching her mother work herself to exhaustion to make ends meet. "You lie," she snarled, her voice low and venomous. The whispered word cut through the restaurant's stunned silence more effectively than a shout. "Olivia, I'm not—" "Don't you say my name," she snapped, taking a step back as if his proximity might contaminate her. "My father was a dreamer. He was a good man who had to leave. That's what my mother told me. You are not a good man." The pain in his eyes was stark, but Olivia felt no pity. She felt nothing but a cold, hard knot of betrayal in her chest. "She told you that to protect you," Conrad said, his voice ragged. She was a better person than I ever deserved. "Protect me?" Olivia let out a harsh, incredulous laugh that held no humor. "She protected you. She created a myth so I wouldn't grow up hating the man who abandoned us. Did you ever wonder about us? Did you ever once, in the last 24 years, stop counting your money for 5 seconds to think about the woman you left pregnant and alone?" Her voice rose with every word, raw and accusatory. Mr. Beaumont started forward, intending to intervene, but a sharp, almost imperceptible gesture from Conrad froze him in his tracks. He wanted to hear it. He needed to hear it. This was his judgment, delivered by the daughter he had never known. "I watched her," Olivia continued, her voice breaking, tears of rage and grief blurring her vision. "I watched her hands get calloused and sore from sewing other people's clothes. I watched her skip meals so I could eat. I held her hand while she died, drowning in debt for the crime of getting sick in a country where men like you decide who lives and who dies. Where were you?" The question hung between them, a final, devastating blow. Where was he? He was in boardrooms, on private jets, in his sterile penthouse, building an empire of glass and steel on a foundation of lies and forgotten promises. He was becoming Conrad Blackwood, a man so powerful he could move markets, yet so hollow he had let the only 2 people who ever truly mattered to him suffer and die alone. "I made a choice," he said, his voice barely audible. "A terrible, selfish choice. I was young and poor, and I was offered a world I couldn't imagine. I told myself I would come back for you both. It was a lie I clung to until it was too late." He began to explain the deal with Alistair Blackwood, the renunciation of his name, the severing of his past. He spoke not in justification, but in a flat, dead tone of confession. He was stripping away the armor, piece by piece, revealing the scared, ambitious boy who had sold his soul for a kingdom. But his confession offered Olivia no comfort. It was just a story, a pathetic excuse for a lifetime of neglect. "So you traded us," she said, her voice laced with contempt. "You traded my mother's love and my entire life for a corner office and a new last name. Congratulations. I hope it was worth it." She turned her back on him, her entire body shaking. She couldn't be here, couldn't breathe the same air as him. She started walking away, past the staring faces of the patrons, past her shocked co-workers. "Olivia, wait!" he called after her, his voice desperate. She stopped at the edge of the dining room but didn't turn around. "My mother died 6 months ago," she said, her voice hollow and empty. "She died thinking you were still that dreamer, the man she loved. She died without ever knowing you became this. And for that, I will never, ever forgive you." She walked out of the Gilded Spoon, leaving behind her job, her apron, and the shattered remains of the man who was her father. She walked out into the cool night air and didn't stop, her footsteps echoing on the pavement as she fled the wreckage of her past. Back in the restaurant, Conrad stood alone, the silence of the room a roaring in his ears. He looked older, smaller, as if his daughter's words had physically stripped him of his power and wealth, leaving only a shell of a man filled with regret. He slowly sank back into his chair, the $50,000 check lying on the table like a token of his monumental failure. He had spent his entire life acquiring things, companies, properties, power. But in that moment, he understood with devastating clarity that he had lost the only thing that had ever truly mattered. Eleanor Vance, who had been waiting discreetly in a town car outside, entered the restaurant. The patrons were beginning to whisper amongst themselves, the drama providing more entertainment than any theatre. She walked to his table, her expression calm and unreadable. She picked up the cashier's check and placed it back in its envelope. "This isn't the way, Conrad," she said softly. He looked up at her, his face a grey mask of despair. "I destroyed her." "You told her the truth," Eleanor corrected gently. "Now you have to live with the consequences. Words are meaningless. Apologies are meaningless. Your money is an insult. If you want even a sliver of a chance at redemption, you have to show her you've changed. And that, Conrad, will be the hardest acquisition of your life." He stared at the empty chair where his daughter had sat, the ghost of her righteous anger still shimmering in the air. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about profits or losses, about markets or mergers. He was thinking about a seamstress with a kind smile and a daughter with his eyes. He had a debt to pay, one that couldn't be settled with money. It was a debt of time, of love, of a life he had thrown away, and he had no idea how to even begin to make the first payment. In the weeks that followed the cataclysmic revelation at the Gilded Spoon, Olivia's world felt both smaller and infinitely more complicated. She quit her job immediately, unable to bear the thought of returning to that place. She picked up extra shifts at the diner, the work more grueling, the pay less, but the anonymity a welcome relief. She threw herself into her pre-nursing studies, using textbooks and late-night study sessions as a shield against the turmoil in her heart. She was adrift in a sea of conflicting emotions. There was the burning anger at Conrad for his decades of absence, and the cold, calculated cruelty he'd shown her before he knew the truth. But beneath the anger there was a deeper, more confusing ache, the grief for a father she never had, and the sudden, jarring reality of one she never wanted. The young, idealistic man in the locket was dead, replaced by a ruthless billionaire. She mourned them both. Conrad, for his part, did the one thing he had never done in his life. He retreated. He did not try to contact her. There were no more dramatic confrontations, no envelopes of cash. He seemed to have vanished from her life as completely as he had before she was born. But his presence lingered in subtle, inexplicable ways. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the hospital's billing department. When Olivia opened it, her hands trembling, she found a statement showing that her mother's entire outstanding medical debt, a staggering 6-figure sum, had been paid in full by an anonymous benefactor. She knew instantly who it was. She wanted to be angry, to see it as another attempt to buy his way back into her life. But all she could feel was a profound, soul-shaking relief. It was a weight lifted, a mountain turned to dust. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a breath of fresh air she desperately needed. A week later, she received another letter, this one from the NYU bursar's office. It informed her that a new scholarship had been established, the Sarah Sterling Memorial Scholarship for Nursing. It was a full-ride scholarship, endowed to cover the complete tuition, room, and board for one promising nursing student each year who demonstrated exceptional empathy and resilience in the face of hardship. The inaugural recipient, the letter stated, was Olivia Sterling. Tears streamed down Olivia's face as she read the letter. He had used her mother's name. He had created something good, something that would help people in her honor. It was a gesture far more powerful than a check. It was an act of remembrance, an admission of his failure, and a tribute to the woman he had abandoned. It was clever, strategic, and deeply personal, the work of a man who knew how to leverage his resources to achieve a desired outcome. But this time, the outcome wasn't a corporate takeover. It was a desperate, silent plea for a second chance. Liam, who had kept in touch after she'd left the restaurant, met her for coffee. "So, the mysterious benefactor strikes again?" he asked gently, seeing the conflict in her eyes. "He's trying to fix things with his checkbook," Olivia said, her voice wavering. "It's the only way he knows how." "Maybe," Liam said, stirring his latte. "Or maybe it's the only way he can show you he's sorry without you slamming the door in his face. He's giving you the freedom to pursue your dream, the dream your mum had for you. He's not asking for anything in return." His words resonated with her. He wasn't demanding her time or forgiveness. He was quietly removing the obstacles from her path, giving her the future her mother had worked so hard to provide. It was a father's act, even if it came 24 years too late. Finally, after a month of silence, a simple, handwritten note arrived at her apartment. It was not on corporate letterhead, but on plain, cream-colored cardstock. The handwriting was sharp and precise. "Olivia, I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but I will be at the coffee shop on the corner of your street this Saturday at 10 a.m. I will sit and wait for 1 hour. If you don't come, I will understand, and I will not bother you again. I just want a chance to tell you about your mother. Not as an excuse, but so you know how brightly her memory shines, even in the shadow of my mistakes. Conrad." He had signed it with his real name. On Saturday morning, Olivia stood by her window, watching the corner coffee shop. She saw him arrive, not in a chauffeured town car, but in a simple black sedan which he drove himself. He wasn't wearing a suit, but a simple sweater and slacks. He looked like any other man, stripped of his billionaire armor. He went inside, sat at a small table by the window, and ordered a single cup of coffee. And he waited. Olivia's heart was at war with itself. Part of her wanted to stay in her apartment, to let him sit there alone, to give him a taste of the loneliness he had inflicted on her and her mother. But another part of her, a part that was curious and tired of being angry, was drawn to that window. She wanted to know about her mother through his eyes. She wanted to understand the choice that had defined her entire life. At 10:50, with only 10 minutes left in his self-allotted hour, she made her decision. She took the silver locket from its box and clasped it around her neck. Taking a deep breath, she left her apartment and walked across the street. When she entered the coffee shop, he looked up, and the relief that washed over his face was so profound it was almost painful to watch. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just watched her as she approached the table and sat down in the chair opposite him. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken history. Finally, Olivia spoke, her voice quiet but clear. "Tell me about her." A fragile dawn was breaking. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a fairy tale reunion. It was something far more real and far more difficult. It was the first tentative step onto a long, uncertain bridge, a chance to build something new from the wreckage of the past. It was a daughter giving a father the one thing his money could never buy: a chance to begin. From the cold, polished floors of the Gilded Spoon to the shocking revelation that shattered two worlds, Olivia and Conrad's journey is a powerful reminder that our past never truly leaves us, and that the highest debts we owe are not financial, but emotional. Their story shows that even the deepest wounds can begin to heal, not with grand gestures or easy forgiveness, but with quiet atonement, genuine remorse, and the courage to take a single, fragile step toward understanding. It's a testament to the enduring strength of a mother's love and a daughter's resilience. What do you think? Can a lifetime of neglect ever be truly forgiven? Or are some mistakes too great to overcome? Is Conrad's attempt at redemption genuine or just another strategy? We would love to read your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, share it with a friend who loves a gripping emotional tale, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the deepest corners of the human heart. Thank you for listening.